This is our first kill count recap. Wes Craven directed and Kevin Williamson wrote the 1996 American slasher film Scream. David Arquette, Courteney Cox, Matthew Lillard, Rose McGowan, Skeet Ulrich, and Drew Barrymore appear. Scream's narrative follows high school girl Sidney Prescott, Campbell and her classmates as they become the targets of a costumed serial killer known as Ghostface on the anniversary of her mother's death. Williamson's script, developed under the title Scary Movie, was the subject of an intensive bidding war from numerous studios until Miramax Films won the rights. Despite having previously declined the possibility, Craven opted to make the picture after reading the script and being frustrated by the failure of Vampire in Brooklyn 1995. The engagement of Barrymore and Cox aided in securing studio sponsorship. Principal photography took conducted in California from April to June 1996 on a $15 million budget. Craven reduced the film's violence following a long battle with the Motion Picture Association of America over the planned R rating. Scream was not expected to perform well on December 20, 1996, due to concerns about releasing a slasher film during a time normally reserved for holiday entertainment, but it went on to earn approximately $173 million worldwide through word of mouth, ending up a surprise success and one of the year's highest-earning films. Reviews have applauded the cast's performances and the film's distinctive meta-comedy, but some criticized the excessive violence and lack of suspense in favor of the humor. Scream helped improve Williamson's writing career as well as the profiles of the rest of the ensemble. Scream is today considered one of the best horror and slasher flicks of all time. It has been credited with reigniting interest in the horror genre throughout the 1990s, following a period of decline. It has stayed important because Barrymore's participation helped make participating in horror films more acceptable to notable actors and improved the attraction of horror films with younger audiences. The film's popularity spawned a multimedia franchise that includes the sequels Scream 2 1997, Scream 3 2000, Scream 4 2011, Scream 2022, and Scream V 2023, in addition to a compilation of a television series. The film begins with Casey Becker Drew Barrymore answering phone calls from an unknown caller. At first, it appears like he dialed the wrong number, but it quickly becomes evident that he is playing with her, and his voice becomes increasingly menacing. When Casey discovers her caller can see her, she becomes terrified. When the caller threatens to kill her and compels her to answer movie trivia in return for her life and the life of her boyfriend, Steve, whom she sees roped up on her own patio, she begins to worry. The caller torments Casey after killing Steve, eventually bursting into the house and following her. He is clothed in a black suit with a white ghost mask over his face. Just as her parents arrive into the driveway, he follows her across her lawn. They miss her, and Casey is stabbed in the chest while unable to scream. After murdering Casey, the killer hangs her body in the backyard for her parents to find. Then we meet Sidney Prescott, played by Neve Campbell, and Billy Loomis, acted by Skeet Ulrich. Billy climbs into her bedroom window and attempts intercourse with her, but Sidney is apprehensive and prefers to stay a virgin for the time being. They are almost caught by Sidney's father, Neil Lawrence Hecht, who enters Sidney's room to discuss his upcoming trip out of town. We learn that Sidney's mother was murdered about a year ago, leaving Sidney and her father alone. Cotton Weary, played by Liev Schreiber, was recognized as the murderer by Sidney's evidence, despite Cotton's swearing innocence. The next day, news of the murder spreads across Sidney's school, and classes are briefly cancelled. Sidney decides to remain with her closest friend Tatum Rose McGowan now that her father is gone and she is alone. Randy Jamie Kennedy, who is fascinated with horror movies, and Stu, played by Matthew Lillard, a class clown type who used to date Casey Becker, sat with Sidney, Tatum, and Billy. As a police inquiry begins, the press media descends on town. Sidney Prescott, a teen, is dealing with the one-year anniversary of Cotton Weary's rape and murder of her mother, Maureen. Her tragedy has rendered her unable to complete her connection with her lover, Billy Loomis. Sidney is home alone while her father, Neil, is out on business. She receives a call mocking her about Maureen's murder and is accosted by Ghostface, who flees just as Billy walks through the window. However, she grows suspicious when he drops a mobile phone, and he is arrested by Tatum's brother, Deputy Sheriff Dewey Riley.
Can you see me right now.
If you hang up on me, you'll die.
Fuck you, you creep. He's in the house. No, he's in the house.
Sidney is challenged at the police station by investigatory journalist Gail Weathers, who alleges Maureen had multiple relationships, including one with Cotton, and that he was wrongfully convicted of her death. Sidney remains at Tatum's house, but the murderer calls again to harass him. The calls are traced back to Neil's phone, but the cops are unable to find him. Billy runs into Sidney at school after his release and further irritates her by equating his absent mother to Maureen's murder.
Go.
Hi, Gail Weathers reporting live from the West Line.
You know me. Sidney, look.
You sell this costume, then find the doc. You think you did it?
20 years ago.
God damn it, Dewey.
Let's get back to work. Don't move. Don't make a sound.
So, how's the book? Oh! Bam! Sid. Super bitch. Leave me alone.
What?
Billy was released. Don't worry, Sid, at school, you'll be...
Raped her, and then...
See? Couldn't have been...
Brain leaking, my mom was killed. I can't believe perfect existence.
One of those students just savaged me.
It was just a joke.
That's not fair.
What if Sidney killed Casey and Steve? Where's God, etc.? In what appears to be a prank,
Ghostface assassinates Principal Himbry after he suspends school in the aftermath of the killings. Tatum's boyfriend, Stu Macker, throws a party to commemorate the completion of the chapter. Dewey and Gail keep an eye on the party in case the killer returns. Tatum is isolated in the garage by Ghostface, who crushes her with the garage door as fellow high schooler Randy Meeks explains the rules of surviving a horror film. After learning of Himbry's death, the majority of the party goes rush to see his hanging body, nearly collapsing Dewey and Gail and unwittingly bringing them to Neil's concealed automobile. Billy arrives at the home to reconcile with Sidney, and they share their first kiss. Following that, they are assaulted by Ghostface, and Billy is stabbed. When Sidney returns, Ghostface murders Gail's cameraman Kenny and stabs Dewey. Gail crashes and is knocked unconscious while attempting to leave in her van. Sidney takes refuge inside the home, trapping Stu and Randy outside as they accuse each other of murder.
what movie is this from? I spit on your garage. Oh, you want to play Psycho Killer? Face, I want to be in the sequel. Randy, what the hell are you...
I want to see Jesus Christ. You don't know the rules? Oh, big no. The day there in the kitchen with a knife. You don't know the rules. Maybe we block. Look. Yes. Oh, lovely. Listen. Thanks. They're coming fast. Slow down.
Gail believes Cotton Weary was unfairly convicted, and she has begun to pick up on a report about Casey Becker's murder. She believes the killings are linked. Tatum drives Sidney to her home, where she receives another phone call from the murderer, who informs her, "You got the wrong guy, Sidney." Again, Sidney is threatened by the killer in the bathroom following her at school, but she flees. Because school is out and the curfew is in effect, a group of pals decides to hold a party. Gail Weathers brings a cameraman to the party in an attempt to talk to Sidney, but she is stopped by Dewey. The two of them talk and seem to have a mutual affection for one another. They enter the party and Dewey chooses not to bust the party goers for underage drinking. During the party, Billy and Sidney go upstairs and Sidney has sex with him. Meanwhile, Tatum is murdered in the garage by the killer, who has infiltrated the party after all. After the interlude between Sidney and Billy, the door opens and in walks the killer, who stabs Billy in the back. Another chase starts. Dewey is stabbed. Gail, in her news van, swerves to avoid hitting Sidney and runs her car down a hill, striking a tree and appearing to be killed. They converse and appear to have a mutual fondness for one another. They arrive at the party, and Dewey decides not to arrest the attendees for underage drinking. During the party, Billy and Sidney go upstairs and have sex. Meanwhile, Tatum is slain in the garage by the murderer, who has, after all, penetrated the party. Following the pause between Sidney and Billy, the door opens, allowing the killer to enter and knife Billy in the back. Another pursuit begins. Dewey has been stabbed. Gail, in her news van, swerves to avoid colliding with Sidney and drives down a slope, striking a tree and looking to be killed. Billy blamed Mrs. Prescott for his parents' divorce and murdered her as a form of retaliation. Billy and Stu also say that they kidnapped Mr. Prescott and are keeping him in a cupboard. They have framed Mr. Prescott for the killings and plan to hurt themselves in order to make it appear that Mr. Prescott assaulted them, at which time they will murder both him and Sidney. Billy and Stu use the knife to inflict flesh wounds on each other, but they are interrupted by Gail Weathers, who arrives armed with Dewey's pistol. Gail forgets to deactivate the gun's safety, resulting in a scuffle.
Because let's face it, Sidney, your mother was...
Total abandonment causes serious.
Three, Sidney!
Daddy!
Whoa! Oh, suspect. Phone is cellular. Get up! Hit it! Give me the knife. Buddy dies.
Sidney retaliates against her tormentors by murdering Stu with a television and shooting Billy in the head with a pistol. Randy and Dewey are both discovered to be alive. Everything works out in the end, as Gail reveals that the Macker home was the setting for a real-life horror film. Billy, who appears to be injured, returns and lets Randy inside before shooting him in the shoulder, showing himself as the murderer and Stu as his collaborator. Billy admits that they murdered Maureen because he found her romance with his father was the reason his mother left. The two kidnapped Neil in order to blame him for their crimes, then proceeded to stab each other in order to present themselves as the sole survivors. Gail's reappearance interrupts them, giving Sidney the opportunity to incapacitate Billy and kill Stu by dropping a television set on his head. Gail shoots Billy as he attempts to stab Sidney. Billy sits back up when Randy notes that horror film killers reappear for a final shock, and Sidney shoots him in the head, killing him. As daylight rises, Neil is rescued, Dewey is transported by ambulance, and Gail offers an impromptu news broadcast on the events of the night.